instructions.
We got to get rid of this loser. This guy is bad. He's disloyal to the Republican Party. He's disloyal to the people of Kentucky. And most importantly, he is disloyal to the United States of America. And he's got to be voted out of office as soon as possible.
So the question is Trump loyal to the Constitution? You know, we saw Trump there talking about Massey. I think that's going to go down as a big problem for Trump. We will see, but we're not going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about legal issues, war powers resolution. Does Trump even have the authority to go to? You know what? We're going to resolve it. That's what we're talking about.
Things are going to start happening to me now.
I think Tyler is amazing.
And I'm a fan of this show. I've watched several episodes.
Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Tyler. You stink, Tyler.
Never promise crazy a baby.
Oh, I like that. That's a cool idea.
Are either of you homosexuals?
I go both ways. What do you think?
You mean like flaming or?
No, we're not homosexual, but we are willing to learn.
But I do wonder for others, in other cases, whether libertarianism today is just an excuse for many on the right to act selfishly.
Look at me. And then some fat asses in Washington started having opinions. The Olympic Committee started having opinions. You bitch, I know you. You started writing your opinions.
And it just makes me wonder, you're dead, bitch. You know, why are you doing this to this poor guy?
I don't care. I'm a libertarian. What I'm getting is...
Did you vote for Joe Jorgensen or Trump?
Who?
Joe Jorgensen? That was the perfect answer. Thank you.
Here we are. Got some. I was like, why? Twitter's not for some reason showing up. So I was trying to initiate that, and then the intro. We're all done. Anyway, we're here. Eddie's in the chat. Appreciate you coming along for the ride tonight. We're gonna go through the war powers resolution. This is LPR. Tyler Yonke. Thanks for coming in. Do we have? Let's go to the hits here. I wanted to do, this was not, was this a last minute thing today? No, not necessarily. TylerYonke.substack.com. We're going to try to do it maybe this Saturday night. Send out links and members we could just have a chit chat like a Zoom thing, but we're not going to use Zoom. So go to LPR, TylerYonke.substack.com. You can join us there. I'm going to go through some the legal stuff, and also maybe we'll start off with this, which is go through some of these comments over here on GT. I've called him this before. I think he's he's the JC of the JC of the Spotify comments. Willow says, "Congrats to my favorite anti-Semitic lawyer." How dare you say that? I don't think I'm at all anti-Semitic. Keep up the good work. Okay. GT says, let's puck and row. Listen at 1.2 speed to get caught up. I can actually feel my brain expanding. That's nice. Mark Middleton said, Grandpa Mossad Huckabee. Yeah, Huckabee was a bit strange on that. We played that stuff. You can't cuck the tuck, and you can't wanky the Yankee. GT also says, this disembodied spirit of Dr. Jordan Peterson contacted me in a dream and told me that LPR is his favorite podcast because Tyler has a clean house. I do have a clean house. My office needs some sprucing up. I will say that. It's not a mess. It's just there's papers and you put stuff here, put stuff there, and next thing you know, it looks like a problem. I'm glad, GT also said, I'm glad Egypt has made a solid claim to the pyramids because you just know these people would try to claim them otherwise. Wow. No Qatari ever called me Goyim. Well, good for you. And then the last one, I love the Libertarian Party of Rhodesia, LPR. I don't know if that's where I'm going to go ahead. Well, I'll fix these here. It says need review. I'll review those and add them in just fine. So LPR, we are coming to you Wednesday. This is kind of the legal show. Are we going to do a show tomorrow? Possibly tomorrow. Because there's so much out there. And I want to kind of get back to, I mean, you've got the eyebrows with Ben Shapiro. We have this anti-Semitism conference with the National Review put on. It's such an identity politics problem. It's so funny to laugh at these guys. Ted Cruz is going he was there speaking, and he's talking about like, I post one thing good, hello in the morning. Dude, you don't just say hello in the morning. You go like, hello, it's a wonderful day in Israel. I mean, this is the guy that literally, and then he goes, in the comments, there's like me in a bathing suit, an Israeli bathing suit. It's so anti-Semitic. I'm like, no, you're the one that said, I'll do everything I can. You know, I came to, my number one goal is to defend Israel. Then you literally have put out tweets on Independence Day, American Independence Day, but you are talking about Israel. It's the most bizarre stuff. Christmas, I believe, is so as well. He's a strange goat. Anyway, so we've got that. We've got Erica Kirk, some of the comments she's made. I'm going to put some of these together. We're going to play a lot more clips. So either tomorrow or Friday, trying to see which one we will go to. Okay, so the War Powers Resolution, I think it was passed in 1973. However, you know, otherwise it's Article 2, Section 8, I think it is, or 3. I'm trying to remember which one. 3 is the, I don't know. I don't have to, you never had to quote that. Let's take a look here. Where's Congress's power? Congress, power, war, Constitution. And you're like, wait, you're going to be talking about the stuff in the Constitution? Yeah. Article 1, Section 8, not Article 2. Okay. So here, though, is, let's start off with the side like this guy, this Mark Levin guy. And what he says about, does Trump, is this war, and I call it his war, constitutional, whatnot. Here's a little clip that he put out.
Declarations of war 11 times. 6 times during World War II, 1 during World War I, and then earlier in the Republic. And since 1942, there's been none. So that's 84 years without a declaration of war. Meanwhile, we've had the Korean War and the Vietnam War. We've had war in Iraq. Republican and Democrat presidents have been involved. We had the Barbary Pirates War, which was our first official war. When Thomas Jefferson was president, there was no declaration of war. Now, he spoke with Congress and coordinated with Congress. And a president can do that or not, and in my view, probably should at some point, to try to do the best they can to at least appear to be uniting the parties and the nation behind the effort. But in the case of today, for instance, the Democrat Party is effectively giving aid and comfort to the enemy. Their goal is literally, their resolution was to take out our military forces from this military campaign. In other words, in the middle of a spectacularly successful military event, we should turn around and leave. So what does that mean? It means Iran eventually would again have nuclear weapons, tens of thousands of ballistic missiles. They'd be rebuilt by the Communist Chinese. That Communist China would still have its ally there and still be getting oil from them. How would they view the United States military? How would they view the power of the President of the United States? What a complete, comprehensive screw-up that would be. If you like what you just...
I didn't like what I saw. And it's funny, put Liberty's voice, that's what he has there as his, not Liberty. So Mark says a few things. That one, they've not had nuclear weapons. He's also said before that they have nuclear tipped ICBMs. That's just, he says all kinds of bullshit. So it's what it is. And the reality though is not, well, there's imminent threats. We could look at that too. And even then, what is the requirement? It would be nice if they talked to Congress. Oh, would it? Would it be nice? Luke, thank you. Let me put this up here. Here we go. I've heard $10. Thank you, from Luke Necessary. I'm pretty sure that it's not correct, but I've heard I've heard it said by disreputable people that you're a podunk lawyer with no clout. But now you're a potentially podunk lawyer with no clout with $10. I appreciate it. Thank you, of course. And Popcorn says, Tyler is on the Ayatollah side. I always thought he was a prime candidate to be a sleeper cell. No, this is, thank you for that. I don't know if you're joking or not, but even if, let's say you're not, this is what's fantastic. Because you've got to look at, we've seen this before with, look, if you're not for Israel bombing Gaza, you are pro-Hamas. If you're not for this Iran war, you are pro-Ayatollah, right? It's like, okay, well, who's on the other side of that? Jonathan Pollard. So I guess you're a fan of Jonathan Pollard. We get to use these kind of descriptive things, right? Okay, well then I'm sorry if if you're not on the side of the Ayatollah, you're on the side of Jonathan Pollard. And how does that make you feel? Now, there's nuances there, right? You don't have to be anti-American to be. As a matter of fact, I think there's an argument to be. I'm pro-America, and I don't want this to happen. It's like, do you pull your kids out of the street or for doing stupid stuff because you love them? You restrict them. Yeah, sometimes that happens. I just the tip, baby, just the nuclear tip. I promise. Water. Yeah, exactly. And look, even if you want to call me Ayatollah, that's perfect fine. And thank you, Luke. Thank you. Why don't you guys follow in Luke's footsteps? Appreciate it. Follow in the footsteps. Sending in some funds here, because here's what it is too. We've had complaints, and I totally do it. And so what happens when I do a live stream? I shut off the monetization because it's look, I get a little bit. After a few months, you get some stuff. I get some money, and you know what I do? I try to put it back in the show. How do I do that? I put it in my pocket, pay the bills or whatever. There's little things you use, services and whatnot for everything. So it does help a little bit, and I appreciate it. So I turn off the monetization for the live show, and then as soon as I'm done with the show, I turn it back on so people can see it on repeat, or when I put out other clips or whatnot, you get a little monetization. Why not? Why not get a little bit into the pocket? But you can always go to, as we've said here, you go to tyleryonkey.substack.com, and you can put it all up there. You can watch the show there as well. There's a really good app for the podcast, and we put all the shows up there as well. So there you go. Okay, so that's Mark Levin. He's like, look, you don't need, although I would like, because what he wants to restrict himself to is that perhaps if there's a Democrat with the same exact plan, because he's such a pro-Israeli, but he also needs to have his grift, right? So if Obama was doing this, or Biden, he would probably have some problems with it. I mean, it would blow his brain. If Biden was doing this war, I don't know what he would do. I don't know how he would come out after it, but he would have to do something. But so my point is, so then he still needs to have cause to go, that's not what the Constitution says, in case it's a Democrat. Then you can pick and choose, right? Because he's not at all consistent. Okay, let's see. I don't even know who this lady is, but this was another, we'll just go down, different aspects here of what the people think that the Constitution says. This lady says, we'll play
the president can make a case directly to the American people, and Congress's role is the power of the purse.
So the case for Congress is, once we have gone to war, if they don't like it, they can remove the money.
Congress does not have a constitutional role in the declaration of war. Congress has a role in cutting off funds for wars, which it has threatened to do. The president doesn't have to get permission, but yes, you can debate, you can decide, that's his choice and how he wants to do it.
I mean, here I will quote the Constitution. The Congress shall have power to declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal, and make rules.
Okay, I'm just going to pause here because he's like, it's pretty clear what the Constitution says, and he just said that. Now there's more to, what did we say, Article 1, Section 8, and there's more to it, but he just says they have the power to declare war. I mean, that's what is reserved for them. And then he pauses, expecting her to have some sort of reaction. She doesn't, so he just continues reading.
Captures on land and water.
I think
the president shall be the commander-in-chief of the army, but it is Congress that has the power to declare war.
So constitutionally, the Constitution says Congress has the power to declare war, but the issue is whether or not a president who deploys military force abroad needs to do so only after having Congress declare war.
Okay, that's liberal gobbledygook. And but what are you going to do about it, right? To some extent, I mean, this is Ryan Grimm that, I'll put this back up here. It was Ryan Grimm that posted this, and he goes, okay, this is legit funny. And yeah, it is legit funny. But what are you going to do about it? Like, as right now, what are you going to do about it? You think the Supreme Court's going to step in and say, this is an unconstitutional war, bring everything back? No, nothing's going to happen. I mean, if you had balls, the Congress said, hey, this is our job. We're going to go and declare war. They wanted to have a vote on it last week. Massey tried to put that up, and that's why you had this.
We got to get rid of this loser. This guy is bad. He's disloyal to the Republican Party. He's disloyal to the people of Kentucky. And most importantly, he is disloyal to the United States of America. And he's got to be voted out of office as soon as.
Okay, so that's about Massey, and that's just crazy, right? He's saying that because Massey tried to force a vote, and it was voted down because those people don't actually want to put their name to this in case it's a problem, but they're gonna, like put it on the record, like he tried to make them do for COVID as well. Popcorn says, I thought the president has a 45-day window to conduct action before a congressional vote. We will get to that. That's going to be part of it. We're going to talk about that, the War Powers Resolution. Actually, what we're going to do here first is we're going to play a little clip of just kind of the intro. Now, you guys, I don't know what's happening here. I'm not going to kind of mock. I'm going to kind of laugh. Brian McClanahan, who I absolutely love, he's a historian, and he is so good on these issues. Okay, I've learned a bunch about the 14th Amendment from him, the historical parts, and he's really good. I learned a lot of legal stuff from him as well. And we are going to play a clip here of him talking about this War Powers Resolution. Now, he's going to reference an article. We're actually going to read that article. But here's a little bit of context.
The president has this amount of time to do this, and this. I've said it. And I've even got
on 1.25 speed, okay?
People that follow me that have said, well, the president followed the War Powers Resolution. No, he didn't. He didn't do it at all. As this piece of the Washington Examiner makes clear, he didn't follow it in any way. So I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to work back to the unconstitutional nature of the War Powers Resolution. Not from the president's perspective, but the way it really is unconstitutional. And then I'm going to talk about where this stupidity comes from with these people running around on social media saying that the president can do whatever they want because of the Constitution, Article 2 in particular. So let me start with the War Powers Resolution. So this was passed in 1973 during the Vietnam War. And, of course, Richard Nixon is in office. He thinks it's unconstitutional. But the idea was to limit presidential war powers. And so Nixon didn't like that. And every president since hasn't liked it. But Congress was trying to do the right thing, though they were doing the wrong thing by trying to do the right thing. Now remember, Vietnam was never a declared war. Lyndon Johnson ultimately caused escalation in Vietnam with the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which was a farce. It didn't even happen.
Let me make a comment about that real quick. I remember growing up, my dad talking about, it's a police action, right? He would say that. Now, he was saying that because he felt that it never got properly adjudicated the war the way it should have been, right? You go in with shock and awe, you call it some sort of a police action. You're really not, you're pussyfooting around, and it's taking more time rather than just putting the hammer down, which is what he wanted to have happen. Could be, but I kind of argue from the other way it was a never declared war. That one, you look at the result. What was sorry to deviate a little bit here, but you always have to look at this. What's the intent of going into war in the first place? Sometimes could be corporate reasons why, but the stated reason why we were in a Cold War, we didn't want to have the communists move down from China and the area and circulate, because North Vietnam was part of the China faction, the Viet Cong, and you didn't want it to have communism spread, right? So we had to go into this. We had to kill 50,000 American boys for this, and when it all came out, what happened? Well, South Vietnam was taken over by the North, Cambodia, all this, and you're like, oh, so it just happened anyway, and then we lost a bunch of people. And so, what really brought down the Cold War, what did they say? The Soviets, the Eastern Bloc, blue jeans, okay? Economics. Okay, so let's go back into this.
We had been in Vietnam since the Eisenhower administration with advisors, and there was escalation even before that. But Johnson's really the one that created the military situation there with the number of boots on the ground and, of course, bogged the United States down into this war that no one thought would ever end. In fact, the reason that Richard Nixon was elected in 1968 was because he promised to get the United States out of Vietnam. And by 1972, he had brought a tremendous number of troops home. We had engaged in a massive bombing campaign. And people love this about Nixon. I mean, the 1972 election was a landslide. A lot of people forget that. Closed in 68, but a landslide in 72. And Nixon was extremely popular, which is why Watergate was so, stupid. If it really was an effort to try to rig the election for Richard Nixon, he was going to win anyways. And we can discuss that, what happened there. But Congress thought that Nixon was acting unilaterally, and so, of course, Johnson as well. But they were really going after Nixon. And so they passed the War Powers Resolution to try to limit presidential authority in in these type of situations. Remember, the Korean War was not a declared war. Harry Truman got us involved in the Korean War without any declaration of war from Congress, really without any congressional oversight. This was a United Nations operation with Korea in 1950. And then from that point forward, the United States has been in all kinds of military operations through unilateral executive action up until the present day. And this is what you'll get people to say, well, why are you criticizing Trump? Every president's done it. Yeah, and I've criticized all them too. All of this is unconstitutional. And that's what I find hilarious when people go onto my social media, they watch a video and they haven't watched anything else and they don't know what I've said about these things and they make comments. And there was just one for the video yesterday and, blasted, you wouldn't call that stuff unconstitutional. Again, I can tell you've never read anything I've written where I've said virtually every president in the last 100 years should have been impeached. All the
Okay, I agree with him. Go check that out. That's Brian McClanahan to see is the War Powers Resolution constitutional? He put this up, episode 829 on March 5. Solid stuff. Watergate happened because Nixon was so popular. The table had to be reset in their view anyway. Well, his point about Watergate was because there's tapes and there's Nixon didn't need to do what he was doing because he was super popular. So, and then to glom onto that, of course, it's like anything else. You jump onto the scandal, and then the cover up of the scandal is bigger than the other. So that's what he meant by, like, why are you, and it's kind of, we've talked about this, why are you doing some of these kind of things, right? Have a little bit of foresight, but don't care about the will of the people or whatnot. So I just, by the way, just notice this. Luke put up $10. So, let's follow in Luke's footsteps here. Okay. So that's where we have the war powers. So let's go to the war powers resolution. Federal law enacted on November 7 of 1973 to check the U.S. president's power to commit the country to armed conflict without congressional consent. It's kind of that whole thing that we're talking about. It was passed over President Nixon's veto following widespread concern over executive overreach during the Vietnam War, particularly Nixon's secret bombings of Cambodia and Laos. I mean, that is completely true. I think it was Christmas or over the holidays. I'm trying to remember the name of the bombing campaign that he had. It did not go well. The resolution requires the president to notify Congress within 48 hours of deploying U.S. armed forces into hostilities or situations where imminent hostilities is indicated, consult with Congress, So we're going to talk about this in a little bit more detail, but we're going to actually read an article. This is one that was on the Washington Examiner. No, the War Powers Resolution doesn't give the president 60 days of free war. Is that what you said here? You said a 45-day window to popcorn, but actually I think the notice here, and this is the next one, withdraw troops within 60 days unless Congress authorizes continued military action or declares war. The period may be extended up to 30 days. But is that really the full text of the War Powers Resolution? We will get to it. The Constitution, this is written by Timothy Carney in the Washington Examiner. Tim Carney, there's something, I think he used to be on the local radio show that my wife and I would listen to, Armstrong and Getty. He would come on there and say some great stuff, but they haven't had him on lately because probably because of what he's writing in here. The Constitution clearly grants Congress, not the president, the power to declare war. Thus, most defenders of President Trump's unauthorized war against Iran point to the 1973 War Powers Resolution and claim the law allows the president to wage a war for 60 days without any congressional approval. Here's a Republican member of Congress making this false claim, Mike Lawler. Now, let's talk about Mike Lawler. By the way, this is the first time I'm reading this, so I'm excited to go through this. So my reactions are on the spot. I haven't pre-planned any of this. But Mike Lawler, if you know who he is, I want to say New York senator over there. He's written so many things about anti-Semitism, right? He wants to pass these IHRA laws. He's had a bunch of stuff. He doesn't want you having any conversation that is out of the norm of what the AIPAC or AC. What's the Jewish lobby? Anyway, he's horrible on all these things. Since many of my Democrat colleagues don't seem to understand the War Powers Act, it's very simple. President must notify Congress within 48 hours of deploying troops or commencing an attack. The president must then withdraw troops within 60 to 90 days unless Congress declares blah, blah, blah. This common view is, back to the article, this common view is rooted in a very basic error of understanding caused by careless reading. Let's start with the crucial part of the law from Section 2. Quote, the constitutional powers of the president as commander-in-chief to introduce United States armed forces into hostilities or into situations where imminent involvement in hostilities is clearly indicated by the circumstances are exercised only pursuant to 1, a declaration of war. This is how you do it. 2, specific statutory authority, or 3, national emergency created by attack upon the United States, its territories, possessions, or its armed forces. Okay. So I think that last one is really the key here. If you think Trump is within his rights to launch his Iranian regime change war, read that passage from Section 2 again. It lays out the only 3 possible situations in which the president can introduce our troops into a new war. The first 2 situations involve explicit congressional approval, either a war declaration or something like an authorization for use of military force. The third case is the only case where the president may, without authorization from Congress, introduce our military into hostilities. Quote, a national emergency created by attack upon the United States, its territories or possessions, or its armed forces, unquote. I promise you, read that again. The word only is in there. That means if there's no 1, declaration of war, or 2, authorization of military force, AUMF, the president can only start to enter us into a war if we were already attacked. This goes back to the founding father, James Madison's insistence that the Constitution leave the executive the power to repel sudden attacks. The War Powers Resolution codified this power that had been amplified by Articles 1 and Article 2 of the Constitution, which gave Congress alone the power to declare war and made the president the commander-in-chief of the military. If the Chinese fighter jets are flying here to bomb San Francisco, the commander-in-chief can't be left to wait for both chambers to assemble and vote. This is especially pressing in the 18th century when assembling Congress might take days. So whence this notion that the president gets 60 days of free war? Read down a little bit and you'll understand this confusion. Section 4 of the law lays out mandates of the president in case he introduces troops into the war on the edge of war, or the edge of war. In the absence of a declaration of war from Section 2, we know he may only do this if we have been attacked or are about to be attacked. In such a case of repelling an attack, Section 4 lays out that the president must, 1, make a report to Congress within 48 hours explaining why the war was necessary, and 2, get congressional approval within 60 days or withdraw all the troops. Again, the Section 4 mandates on the president apply only when Congress hasn't declared war. But the president isn't allowed to wage war without congressional authority except for repelling an attack. The 60 days of free war the president apply in the case of a national emergency created by attack on the United States, its territories or possessions or its armed forces. The Trump administration will try to either argue either 1, Iran was about to attack us, or 2, the War Powers Resolution was unconstitutional. Those are trickier arguments. The 60-day war claim is just flat out wrong when it is a war of choice. Now, here's the problem you have, because Brian McClanahan was going to then go on to talk about why the War Powers Resolution is actually unconstitutional. But you've then got to probably push that, because it's a law that's been passed. So you're gonna have to get something before the court. You're gonna have to go up to the Supreme Court and make that argument. And they're likely not going to say that the War Powers Resolution Act was unconstitutional. There's plenty of laws that are unconstitutional. 14th Amendment was never ratified, as an example, that they're just not going to back out on. I mean, so are they going to back out on that as well, the War Powers Resolution? Possibly, but I would say probably not. Now, Damon Root of Reason magazine wrote, will SCOTUS review the Iran war's constitutionality? Don't count on it. So we go back to the other thing, the 60 days. Like he said, there's certain ways you can actually do this. And it looks like we were not, the argument that that we had been attacked or we were on the edge of war is just such bullshit. Especially when anytime you listen to the peoples and it's hilarious how we have been attacked. It was imminent danger. And also, if we didn't attack now is the perfect time. They're so weak. When we have to, it's like, wait, they're so weak. Why are they doing this? And remember, I remember the general's name that Trump killed in this first term. You know, the reaction was like, hey, we're going to strike at this one base right now because we have to show some use of force. So get everyone out. Gone? Good? And then they do it. I mean, yeah. Okay. He writes here, the judiciary is largely absent from the long-running constitutional debate over undeclared foreign wars. In a recent edition of this newsletter, I argued that the war with Iran is unconstitutional because President Trump took the United States to war without first obtaining a congressional declaration of war as required by the U.S. Constitution. In response, a reader we'll call John A. wrote in to say the following: unconstitutional perhaps, but enforcement is political, not judicial. As a practical matter, John A. is probably right. Despite the fact that the Constitution vests the power to declare war exclusively in the hand of Congress via Article 1, Section 8, the U.S. Supreme Court has proven itself unwilling over the past half century or so to hear cases challenging the usurpation of that congressional power by the executive. In 1970, for example, the Supreme Court declined to hear a case known as Massachusetts v. Laird, in which the Bay State wanted the court to rule on the constitutionality of the Vietnam War, which, like the current Iran war, was never formally declared by Congress. Today, we deny hearing to a state which attempts to determine whether it is constitutional to require its citizens to fight in a foreign war absent a congressional declaration of war. Justice William L. Douglas wrote in the dissent. Another way of putting the question is whether, under our Constitution, presidential wars are permissible. Should that question be answered in the negative, we would then have to determine whether Congress has declared war. That question, with which Massachusetts presents, is, in my view, justiciable. The Supreme Court did not explain why it refused to hear Massachusetts v. Laird and several other cases like it that centered on the Vietnam War. But legal scholars generally think the court dodged the issue because most of the justices saw it as a political question. That was best left for Congress and the president to hash it out. As Mikhail Belknap argued in the Oxford Companion to the Supreme Court of the United States, quote, unwilling to precipitate a conflict with the executive, the court protected its institutional interests by leaving the question of the legality of the war to be resolved in the political arena, unquote. Of course, the Supreme Court has not taken such hands-off approach in matters of war and executive power. In Youngstown's Sheet and Tube Company v. Sawyer, famous case, for example, the court famously rejected President Harry Truman's claim that his inherent executive authority allowed him to seize control of most privately owned American steel mills during the Korean War as a national security measure. The president's order does not direct that a congressional policy be executed in a manner prescribed by Congress. It directs that a presidential policy be executed in a manner prescribed by the president. The court stated, yet, quote, the founders of this nation entrusted the lawmaking power to the Congress alone in both good and bad times, unquote. Indeed, the court added, quote, it would do no good to recall the historical events, the fears of power, and the hopes for freedom that lay behind their choice. Such a review would but confirm our holding that this seizure order cannot stand, unquote. You may be thinking that the founders also entrusted the authority to declare war, quote, to Congress alone in both good and bad times, unquote. And you would be correct to think this. The logic of Youngstown Steel cuts against the idea of a president launching a war without congressional authorization, just as it cuts against the idea of a president seizing steel mills without congressional authorization. But the logic of Youngstown Steel is apparently no match for the flexibility of the political questions doctrine, which has conveniently allowed the Supreme Court to step aside the thorny constitutional debate over undeclared foreign wars for many decades with no end in sight. Which brings us back to the point made by reader John A. If Trump is going to pay a price for launching a war without congressional authorization, that price will have to be a political one, since the judiciary is basically AWOL. Yeah, and part of that is you look back at, what's the name? Nixon as an example. Popularity because he actually stopped the draft. That's huge, and that's one way. You know, you get your everything in an uproar. I don't know why all the stuff's not loading in here, the chat, but we can go to this one here. Watergate happened because, yeah, we said that. Suddenly liberals are against war again. Okay, great point. Great point, Popcorn Power 8751. Yeah, they are, and that's hypocritical of them. But it's also, look at, I mean, the hypocrites go both ways, right? So, you know, yes, we had a bunch of the neocons that were for the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. And then they've backtracked over the few years. They maybe don't want anything in Ukraine. You're all up in an uproar. And then, but it's all situational. And it really has to do with who's pulling your strings and whatnot. So anyway, that's a little bit on that. I referenced this last time. The presidential war power is a constitutional answer. This is by Tom Woods. I don't think I'm going to read all of this, but the president has the power to initiate. We're going to go through a few highlights here. Power to initiate hostilities without consulting Congress. Ever since the Korean War, Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution refers to the president as Commander-in-Chief of the United States, has been interpreted this way. But what the framers actually meant by that clause was that once war had been declared, it was the president's responsibility as Commander-in-Chief to direct the war. So, and that goes against what the lady has said. No, he can just throw stuff out there. Then it's up to them to declare war after the fact. But it's like, wait, what? The direction of war, when authorized or began, the president acting alone was authorized only to repel sudden attacks. Hence the decision to withhold from him only the power to declare war, not to make war, which was thought to be necessary emergency power in case of foreign attack. Framers assigned to Congress what David Gray Adler has called senior status in a partnership with the president for the purpose of conducting foreign policy. Congress possesses the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations, to raise and support armies, to grant letters of marque and reprisal, to provide for the common defense, and even to declare war. Congress shall, with the president, the power to make treaties and appoint ambassadors. As for the president himself, he is assigned only two powers relating to foreign affairs. He is the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, and he has the power to receive ambassadors. At the Constitutional Convention, the delegates expressly disclaimed any intention to model the American executive exactly after the British monarchy. James Wilson, for example, remarked that the powers of the British king did not constitute a proper guide in defining the executive powers. Some of these prerogatives were legislative nature, among others that of war and peace. Edmund Randolph likewise contended that the delegates had no motive to be governed by the British government as our prototype. To repose such foreign policy authority in the legislative rather than the executive branch of government was a deliberate and dramatic break with the British model of government, with which they were most familiar, as well as with other nations, where the executive branch, in effect the monarch, possessed all such rights, including the exclusive right to declare war. The framers of the Constitution believed that history testified to the executive's penchant for war. As James Madison wrote to Thomas Jefferson, the Constitution presupposes what the history of all governments demonstrates, that the executive branch of the power most interested in war and most prone to it. It has accordingly, with studied care, vested the question of war in the legislature. Madison even proposed excluding the president from negotiation of peace treaties on the grounds that he might obstruct a settlement out of the desire to derive power and importance from the state. At the Constitutional Convention, Pierce Butler was for vesting the power of the president, who will have all the prerequisite qualities and will not make war, but with the nation will support it. Butler's motion did not receive so much as a second. Okay, so this gives you some of the idea there. Now let's go to the next one. John Adams made war on France without consulting Congress. This is kind of the stuff that, what's his noodle? Levin was saying as well. These are arguments and then reposes to that. Supporters of a broad executive war power have sometimes appealed to the quasi-war with France in the closing years of the 18th century as an example of unilateral war-making on part of the president. Francis Weymouth Wormuth, an authority on war, power, and constitution, describes that contention as altogether false. John Adams took absolutely no independent action. Congress passed a series of acts that amounted, so the Supreme Court said, to a declaration of imperfect war, and Adams complied with these statutes. Wormuth's reference to the Supreme Court recalls a decision rendered in the wake of the Quasi-War, in which the court ruled that Congress could either declare war or approve hostilities by means of the statute that authorized an undeclared war. The Quasi-War was an example of the latter. Now, I will just say this about Tom's, kind of referencing what the Supreme Court had said. The Supreme Court, obviously, we just read another article. They don't want to get involved in a lot of these things. Right. And so with that in mind, I don't know, it's nice to reference the Supreme Court in supporting your position and a ruling they've done. But as we've seen before and how they operate, they don't want to get entangled in this. Now, Ban Photoshop wants to know, what am I drinking tonight? Well, I am drinking another Athletic Brewery. This is their hazy, Free Wave IPA, hazy IPA. Now, I'm abstaining from drinking during the week, so we'll refresh that whole idea on Friday. Just a little note out there, I'm going golfing on Sunday with my son. I've been playing well, so hopefully all good here. We've got JC in the chat. He's saying hi to everybody, and yes, thanks JC for coming in. Okay, let's keep reading about some of this stuff here. So he's basically saying, no, that's not really what the Quasi-War with John Adams. So another one is Jefferson acted unilaterally against the Barbary Pirates. Mark Levin brought up Jefferson. I think he brought up Madison as well. And we talked about Madison on the initial part saying, hey, we don't even want we would rather have the legislature involved than the executive branch, because the legislature is less prone to war than the executive would be. Another incident frequently cited on behalf of the general presidential power to deploy American forces to commence hostilities involves Jefferson's policy toward the Barbary states, which demanded protection money from governments whose ships sailed through the Mediterranean. Congressional naval legislation had provided that, among the other things, 6 frigates shall be offered and manned as the President of the United States may direct. Final authorization of the funding of the last 3 ships was approved in late 1798, so the frigates in question were ready for action immediately prior to Jefferson's accession to office. It was to this instruction and authority that Jefferson appealed when he ordered American ships to the Mediterranean. In the event of a declaration of war on the United States by the Barbary powers, these ships were to protect our commerce and chastise their insolence by sinking, burning, or destroying their ships and vessels wherever they shall find them. In late 1801, the Pasha of Tripoli did declare war on U.S. Jefferson sent a small force to the area to protect American ships and citizens against potential aggression, but insisted that he was unauthorized by the Constitution, without the sanction of Congress, to go beyond the lines of defense. Congress alone could authorize measures of defense also. Thus, Jefferson told Congress, I communicate to you all material information to this subject, and that the exercise of this important function confided by the Constitution of the legislation exclusively, their judgment may form itself on the knowledge and consideration of every circumstance of weight. Okay, I'm not going to go through all the, once again, I'm hitting highlights of this. So kind of knocks out that we're just hitting these different arguments of past aggressions that are cited by people, by the founders and whatnot, about the congressional powers or the war powers. Presidents have sent men into battle hundreds of times without getting congressional authorization. Once again, this is a clean hands, as we call it here in the law, which is you don't get to point out the faults of someone else if you're doing it as well, right? And so it's like, okay, does that mean that then Trump just gets to do it? Perhaps, but probably not. This argument, like so much propaganda, originated in the U.S. With the U.S. government itself. At the time of the Korean War, a number of congressmen contended that history will show that On more than 100 occasions in the life of this republic, the president, as commander-in-chief, has ordered the fleet or the troops to do certain things which involve the risk of war without the consent of Congress. In 1966, in defense of Vietnam War, the State Department adopted a similar line. Since the Constitution was adopted, there have been at least 125 instances in which the president has ordered the armed forces to take action or maintain positions abroad without obtaining prior congressional authorization, stating with the undeclared war in France. Okay, but we just talked about that one already. We have already seen that the war in France in no way lends support to those in favor of broad presidential war powers. As for the rest, the great presidential scholar Edward S. Corwin pointed out in his lengthy list of alleged precedents consisted mainly of fights with the pirates, landing small naval contingents on barbarous or semi-barbarous coasts, the dispatch of small bodies of troops to chase bandits and cattle rustlers across the Mexican border, and the like. To support their position, therefore, the neocons and their left liberal clones are counting chases of cattle rustlers as example of presidential warmongering. Okay. War Powers Resolution of 1973 gives the president the power to commit troops anywhere he likes for 90 days. Remember, we just talked about that. 60 with an extension of 30. The War Powers Resolution is incoherent. Okay, that's Section 2 provides that the president's power to initiate military action is limited to 1, declaration of war, 2, specific statutory authority, or 3, a national emergency created by attack upon the United States, its territories or possessions, or its armed forces. But at the same time, it authorizes the president to introduce military force for up to 90 days for any reason at all, which obviously unconstitutional. He's written about that elsewhere. So, first of all, we've talked about this, the War Powers Resolution Act that was passed in 73. What we're doing now is there's not an attack that's been upon us, okay, or the U.S. So therefore, that does not work. But as Tom and Brian McClanahan have said, the War Powers Resolution Act is actually unconstitutional, okay? But then you have to go back to the Constitution, which is, Congress is the one that declares war. So you're not even in this position. 1, Trump hasn't followed the War Powers Resolution. But 2, if you're saying it's unconstitutional, well, then you go back to the more restrictive means, which is Congress has to declare war. If the UN, United Nations, authorizes military action, the president does not need to consult Congress. Let's read this because it just makes me laugh. That's even been a claim. The UN Charter itself notes that the Security Council's commitment for member nation troops must be authorized by those nations' respective constitutional process. So I wouldn't even go past that. So that's I think. The remaining claims, somewhat more technical in nature, have been put forth most memorably by John Yoo, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General George W. Bush. These are paraphrases of Yu's positions. They are replied to in more detail in Who Killed the Constitution by author Kevin Gutzman. Now, let me talk to you about John Yoo. Going to law school, we talked about him because it was all during this time. And John Yoo, and I was more on his side at the time, but it's somewhat nefarious. Basically, Bush wants to have, and it's like this: you have attorneys on staff or whatever, and you're in the executive, and he's like, draft out for me the legal authorizations to go to war. And maybe have another attorney, and you say, draft to me all the other side. I want full contingent. And that's what John Yoo did. Now, he was a fellow traveler for the neocons, so it wasn't a problem. So he went through and drafted all these arguments, proposals for war, and I believe is, the idea down there of Guantanamo, all this kind of stuff. And, that's where he became very vilified from the left, the anti-war side, at least for the Bush wars. But anyway, it'd be interesting to go take a look back into that again. I'm not going to do it here. In the 18th century, a declaration of war was merely a rhetorical and communicative act, a courtesy to the enemy, and did not involve the initiation or authorization of hostilities. Thus, in granting Congress the power to declare war, the Constitution had merely given it the power to communicate to an enemy people, as well as to neutrals and to countries' own citizens, that a state of war existed. The president, and on the other hand, retained the power actually to bring the United States into war by commencing military action. That seems a little bit harsh. This is partly correct. In the 18th century, a declaration of war, which could indeed have lesser meaning, but a review of 18th century usage reveals that to declare war could also mean actually to begin a war. Consider also that the Constitution was being debated. Federalists sought to reassure skeptical anti-federalists that the president's powers were not so expansive after all. For one thing, the Federalists said the president lacked the power to declare war. In order for their argument to carry weight, declare war must have been taken to mean power to initiate hostilities. For no anti-federalist would have been appeased by, sure, the president can take the country to war on its own initiative, but the power to declare, to draft declaratory statements will rest with Congress. Sorry, I messed that up so bad, but that's just so. If Yu's arguments were correct, you should expect to see presidents in the years immediately following ratification of the Constitution taking bold military action without concerning themselves much about the will of Congress. And according to Yu, had only the power to issue declarative statements. But as we've seen in the examples of Washington, Adams, and Jefferson, the opposite was in fact the case. These early presidents were careful to defer to Congress. Another claim, Congress may have some power over major wars, but lesser use of force are reserved for the president alone. The evidence of the early republic contradicts this claim. The Supreme Court Justice Samuel Chase summed up the reigning doctrine in 1800, quote, Congress is empowered to declare general war, or Congress may wage a limited war, limited in place, in objects, and in time, unquote. In 1804 case of Little v. Barrowby, involved a ship commander who, during the quasi-war with France in the late 1790s, had seized a ship that he thought was illegally trading with France. The commander was following a directive from President John Adams in seizing this ship, which had been coming from France, but Congress had authorized President Adams only to seize ships going to France. In short, the president's directive ventured beyond what Congress had called for in this limited war. In a unanimous decision, the court declared that the commander was liable for damages, even though he had acted in accordance with a presidential directive. No such presidential directive could override the authority of Congress, said the court. See, that's back when courts would make decisions on this kind of stuff. The vesting clause grants the president a wide array of unspecified powers pertaining to foreign affairs. You won't hear this argument in many casual discussions of presidential war powers, but since Yu cited it in his draft memorandum he wrote for the Department of Defense in early 2002, it's worth a brief reply. Again, a lengthy reply can be found in Who Killed the Constitution? The vesting clause can be found in Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution. Quote, the executive power shall be vested, the executive being the president, shall be vested in a president of the United States of America. According to this view, unquote. According to this view, the vesting clause bestows on the president a host of unspecified powers in addition to the specific ones listed in the rest of Article 2. The framers of the Constitution, they say, thereby showed that they wanted the president to exercise all powers and would have been recognized in the 18th century as being fundamentally executive in nature, even if those powers are not actually mentioned in the Constitution. Congress, on the other hand, is assigned no such open-ended authority, but is instead limited by the Constitution to all legislative powers herein granted. Of reference to the specific list of powers and that then follows. The conclusion, the president may rightly exercise all powers related to foreign affairs, since such powers are by nature executive, except those specifically assigned to Congress. Unfortunately for you, he will not find any support for his views on the executive power and the vesting clause in the state constitutions drawn up after 1776. In the Federalist or in the state ratification debates, nowhere in the state constitutions do we see any indication of the intent to vest the executive with an array of unspecified powers beyond those expressly mentioned. In Federalist 69, Alexander Hamilton argued that the American president would be much weaker than the British king and cited the specific list of powers the Constitution grants the president. The argument would have been absurd and dishonest if the vesting clause had given the president an additional reservoir of powers beyond those Hamilton cataloged. Curtis Bradley and Martin Flaherty, writing in the Michigan Law Review, conclude that, quote, in the thousands of pages recording those debates, The argument that the vesting clause grants the president a foreign affairs powers simply does not appear. In short, there is no constitutional support for the presidential war powers claimed by the mainstream left and right. That's why they usually wind up claiming that the congressional power to declare war is obsolete. They can't deny its existence, so they deny the document in which it is contained, and that means losing the argument. Okay, so we basically went through that whole entire thing. D.L. Cummings, Liberty Dad, also did a breakdown of some of these things about the intent of what the War Powers Resolution is, War Powers myth. If you want to go check that out, it's posted in but we already went over. I don't really care to necessarily go over that. There's also this thing here, how I sent Mark Levin home crying. This was in 2011 by Tom Woods. Basically talks about the little bit of a debate that he had with Mark Levin. And if you want to go check that out, you can do that as well. Nick Rekieta would drink. Why can't you be more like Nick? Do I have any? I have glasses, but I don't have sunglasses. But these glasses I can't see with it because I don't need them to read. He wears sunglasses now, and he's gay, I think. Tyler is kind of like Nick. Tyler lost custody of Tiger King, just like Nick lost custody of his kids. I don't know about that. I think the kids just went. They graduated. They emancipated. The kids just went on their own. I think Toad tested positive for cocaine. That might be misremembering that. Yeah, but he was one of the kids. I was a parent in that squabble. And I'm just like, you know what? I didn't lose custody. I'm just like, I can't handle these kids anymore. I think, is that what happened? I don't know. Possibly. Okay, so that's kind of our deal with the war powers. Just right at an hour tonight. I learned some things there tonight. I hope you guys did too, with an understanding of what actually is this war powers. Are we even following it? But the reality is, what's going to happen? I think Damien Root made a great article there about like, well, so it's wrong. Okay, the only and to some extent I get it where the Supreme Court's like, look, this is political question, which really means like, what are you going to do about it? Well, you're going to punish in the midterm. That's really what's going to happen. Okay, you're likely going to punish pretty harshly in the midterm. I predict that that's going to be problematic for the Republicans. The question is, how is this going to treat Massey? I think that is, for me, the only one I even care about because it is so blatant. Matter of fact, there was, let's see if I can even find it here. Massey put out a tweet. Let's see if I can find it. Put out a tweet about his opponent. So evidently his opponent was a never Trumper to the point where he dropped his affiliation with the Republican Party. And when he dropped it because of Trump, I can't find it. I didn't save it here. He dropped it because of Trump. And now Trump's endorsing him. And why is it Trump endorsing him? It all comes back to Israel. And let me see do I have this? Let's do this here. I think I got a background. There we go. We need to, this is how you protect yourself. So it all comes down to Israel, right? Which is, you've got this war, Adelsons are dumping millions and millions and hundreds of millions of dollars. Who knows what they did behind the scenes to help Trump out. You've got Jared Kushner, it's just, Epstein, right? All these little connections. And with that in mind, you got Massey out here forcing the president's hand, oddly, onto some things. Like the Epstein, literally forced him to release the files, which you watch them, and unless you're Michael Tracy, you think they're a big deal. So it's somewhat interesting there. Okay, I'm sorry, it's getting queasy with that there. Speaking of Nick Rekieta, I saw this come on. Barnes went on TPUSA or Charlie Kirk's show, and now there's posting stuff about when he was on there before. And people were saying, "Why are you having Barnes on there?" Now, I don't think people like Barnes. I mean, even Tom Woods he goes, Barnes is a longtime supporter of Israel until he started having misgivings over the past year or two. And he has never, to my knowledge, made any sweeping statements about Jews as a group. Criticism of the Israel regime. Now, that's not necessarily true. he went after Scott. Yes, he was very big protecting. Matter of fact, that's how I got blocked was not because of Rekieta. It was because of his ridiculous comments about making declarative and just conclusory statements about Scott Horton on something. And I chimed in and then he blocked me. But he was going after Scott Horton. His reasons for going after a lot of people early on was because of the war in Israel. And then maybe he's changed, but he's never going to admit to why he's changed. It's just, I think the wind blows in a way and it goes up his skirt and he feels good about that. So, you know, look, some of the reasons that people didn't like Barnes with Charlie Kirk was because he's too right wing. And I'm like, he's kind of a piece of shit. You look back at the Rekieta stuff, we walked through all that. He was a complete piece of shit, calling people. I mean, that was the most ridiculous stuff. Like, oh, if you live in this one place, you might be a pedophile. And I'm like, okay, but we can say the same thing about why do you live in Vegas? Now, I know people don't like certain people that I'm talking about, some of these attorneys, whatnot, da-da-da-da-da. Let's go back up here, though. Let's go back up to see if we can get the stream. I don't even think it's reviewable anymore. I can't. Which was Luke gave us $10 to start the show. Appreciate that, Luke. We read some stuff off of Spotify, so you can go over to Spotify if you want to watch the show as well. TylerYonke.substack.com. That's where you get all the excitement. I'm going to try to do a thing see if we can do it this Saturday. So give me some conversation. No one's chiming in on the chat over there on the Substack. I know there's people joining still, but we want to do a group session. So let's get going to that. Other than that, everybody, we will see you either tomorrow or Friday. Okay, one of those 2 days, we're going to do another show because it's going to be less. This is the legal stuff. We're going to do one of those others. Take care.
Things are going to start happening to me now.
I think Tyler is amazing.
And I'm a fan of this show. I've watched several episodes.
Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Tyler. You stink, Tyler.
Never promise crazy a baby.
Oh, I like that. That's a cool idea.
Are either of you homosexuals?
I go both ways. What do you think?
You mean like flaming or?
No, we're not homosexual, but we are willing to learn.
But I do wonder, for others, in other cases, whether libertarianism today is just an excuse for many on the right to act selfishly.
Look at me. And then some fat asses in Washington started having opinions. The Olympic Committee started having opinions. You bitch, I know you. You started writing your opinions.
And it just makes me wonder, you're dead, bitch. Why are you doing this to this poor guy?
I don't care. I'm a libertarian. What I'm getting is,
Did you vote for Joe Jorgensen or Trump?
Who?
Joe